Hey, how are you doing? Jackson here. Welcome to yet another moment of living by the code. Now, this one is gonna blow your mind. Have you ever have you ever been in a place of rendering a service to somebody, but you don't know whether um, it's an act of service or a service that actually demands a reward? Have you been there? You know, I think most of the time these two essence are usually confused. We are usually confused of these two things. We are usually confused of what we offer as acts of service and what we offer as actions that demand a reward, or simply wages. But I'm gonna, bring it down to a place of understanding. So I've understood something, and this is after long, years of failed expectations and understanding that, that I had failed to actually communicate from the beginning what I desired. So here you go. What are acts of services? Acts renders as services. They are acts that you do that don't, demand a reward. You do them out of your heart. In short, when you're doing this, you're not expecting any sort of reward or any sort of payment. So when you're doing these actions or this service, it is out of a good heart, out of a willing, giving heart. And when you're done, you're actually more satisfied with what you've done because you're not expecting a thank you, you are not expecting a reward, you're not expecting any sort of commendation whatsoever. And these are what you call acts of services, which are services rendered out of a free will. But you have other services which are rendered with an expectation at the end. And most of the time, we usually don't know how to communicate this, more especially if you're running a business or more especially if you're in ministry. I've realized one of the things that we do not know how to communicate is basically rendering a service and expecting a reward, or rendering a service and expecting some sort of payment. So let me break it down. You see, if I'm gonna do something to somebody from the place of help, from the place of giving, from a selfless place, then one, I'm not expecting anything from this individual. So at the end of the day, when I'm done with it, it means that whether they say thank you or not, whether they give me some sort of commendation or some sort of a thank you, what do you call it, a thank you recognition, or attribute or whatever, whether they give it or not, I wasn't compelled to act by the virtue of an expectation. So I will offer my service without necessarily placing myself in a place of expectation. So this means when I'm done, I'm done. You find that this is not so, and mostly when it comes to ministry, churches, or relationships that are close to us, you find that when you begin to do something for people who, one, are close to us relationally, either in the church ministry, and then you don't usually communicate from the beginning that I'm doing this as a gesture of thank you, I'm doing this as a gesture of a goodwill, a selfless gesture, and you do it with an expectation that somebody will see what you've done and either pay you or recognize that you've done the action without prior communication on that. What happens is this: if you finish with the service or with the action and nobody recognizes it, you tend to be bitter and offensive because you are expecting somebody who you hadn't communicated pertaining what you were doing to to respond to that action either by paying you or by giving you a reward. And I've seen this mostly in churches, whereby you find a minister comes, not even a minister, even you have what do you call it, instrumentalist, you have praise and worship, People who come and generally they begin to offer services in the church with an expectation that the administration of the church or the pastor will notice and give them something. So what happens if the pastor does not notice, or the intended leaders do not notice? These people become offensive. They become offended. They become bitter because I played, and I was never rewarded, or I did this and that and I was never rewarded. And I came to realize that this is basically a major problem with a lot of us, because we do not know how to communicate what we want before we begin doing something. In a lot of our relationships, we do not know how to communicate. By offering our services, we don't know how to communicate that I'm expecting this kind of return. And this is the difference between services that demand a reward or wages or compensation. This is very different, because what happens is, if you're entering into a situation whereby you're gonna do service to someone or an action to somebody, and then there's what you call some wages or reward, you discuss it prior, before the service. It's like a business. You say, you know what, I'm gonna do ABC for you, and this is what I'm expecting for you to give me, or this is what I'm expecting as a return, or wages or salary or some sort. So at the beginning of it, there's a clear-cut communication that somebody is doing ABCD for you, and then after that you're supposed to recompensate them with 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is the agreement. So most of the time, if you don't enter into such an agreement, the other party assume there's a free will. It's a selfless act of service, and if you don't make it, if you are working, or if you are engaging in the service with a mindset of receiving something at the end, you better communicate it before you begin engaging into the service. If you're doing a selfless service and you're not expecting anything, then whether they are there to see it or not, whether they reward you or not, the beginning point was not them. It was you offering yourself to working either for them, or with them. So basically, after your action is done, after your service is done, you complete your service with a whole happy heart, because regardless of whether they noticed or didn't notice, my fulfillment was to see that I did this. That's your reward. Okay, if they get to reward you, good, better. But for you, becoming bitter because somebody never understood your service is something else. And I get, sometimes you can discuss with somebody, and says, I'm gonna do something, and we have an agreement. After I do it, you need to pay me, you need to reward me in this way, in that manner. If they don't reward you after you've done the service, that's a whole different conversation. But I'm speaking of a conversation whereby majority of us enter into service, into actual service, without prior communication that there's an expectation, and then assumingly thinking that the other party will reward us or pay us because of what we've done. And I used to do that a lot of times. Until I came to a place of negotiating my services all the time. If I'm doing it for free, if it's a selfless act, I'm gonna say this on it's my service that I'm offering, either to the ministry, either to the individual, and there's no reward attached at all. If there's something I'm expecting from them, then most definitely I'm gonna outline my expectations. Is, if I'm gonna do this, this is what I'm expecting from you. And this has saved me a lot of heartbreaks, offenses. It has saved me a lot of broken relationships, trust issues and such. So this is a critical place, you need to think about. Anytime you're engaging in any act or service with any individual, communicate your expectations. If it's a selfless act, communicate it earlier. If it's an act that demands some sort of reward, communicate it earlier. This is Jackson. Until next time, live by the code. Thanks.